Thanks for coming, everybody, both locally and remote. I know it's the last day before a long weekend, so thanks for taking the effort to show up. Mark always gives excellent talks, so you have come for a worthwhile thing. So I've known Mark for over 5 years now, and every year or 18 months he shows up in the Valley with some really cool implementations. Mark actually has a small company in England, small but an outstanding team of developers, and he usually does wonderful things inside the browser, leveraging most of the new things that are showing up on the web. He's given a couple of talks at Google in the past on web applications and web application frameworks. Most of what he does, you can sort of one word describe as pushing the envelope on what you can do on the web with web technologies. Today, he's going to talk to us about what you can do with rich metadata on the web in terms of enabling a lot of dynamic user-centric interaction. So rather than taking up more of your time, I'll hand it off to Mike. And go hand off the mic to you as well. Go for it, Mike.
No, I've got a mic strapped to me, so... OK, many thanks, Raman. Hello, everybody. My company's called Web Backplane, and we specialize in anything really to do with the user interface, and in particular, so kind of rich user interface technologies, particularly Xforms, is one of the areas that we've been working on for a number of years. But in particular, also, the idea of dynamic user interfaces, and this is really where our interest in RDFA and the semantic web has come in exploring how far it's possible to use semantic information to create dynamic UIs based on that information. So what I'm going to look at is RDFA, which you may have come across as a W3C standard, but really look at it. So I'm going to give an introduction to RDFA and go through how you might use it and mark it up. But then I want to then show how we're using it in order to create richer user interfaces, rich clients. OK, so perhaps you're familiar with the semantic web. I don't know. I'd imagine probably so. But I think it's worth mentioning what we mean by the semantic web, and in particular RDF, because there is a lot of confusion around it, and it perhaps gets a bad press. Certainly, a lot of people you talk to about RDF in particular say that it's very complicated, people will never use it, and if the semantic web is ever to happen, is ever to take off, then RDF won't be the reason why. So by the semantic web, we just simply mean the normal web, but with semantics, digging out the meaning, digging out the kind of pieces of information that are littered around the web. Now, obviously, there are many different approaches to this. Obviously, I understand that one approach is the kind of generally the Google approach of sort of, let's just dig out the data. Let's not worry too much about it being structured. Let's apply lots of clever algorithms to deducing what this information means. And certainly, you can see that because the structured data side isn't very advanced, then it's always going to win out at the moment, the clever algorithms. But I'd like to show a few examples later where I think that there will be a limit to that approach and where we can start to get benefit by encouraging people to add structured data. And what the semantic web then, to a large extent, is how do we actually dig that information out of the pages and encourage people to add more. So RDFA was an attempt to try and tackle the problem that RDF was too complex, and I'll explain why in a second, and try and tackle that problem and provide another way for people to provide their metadata in a structured way. So the kind of the foundation really of what I'm getting at when discussing RDF is that RDF is a set of concepts rather than a particular means of marking up information, what we might call a serialization. So the bad press that RDF gets is really because of RDF XML. It's a complex XML markup. It's quite difficult to use. There are many different ways of expressing the same thing with this markup. And it is, it hasn't gained widespread adoption. It is not the underpinning of the semantic web. And when people say RDF is complicated, they're usually talking about RDF XML. They're usually talking about this particular serialization of RDF. But RDF itself is fairly simple. RDF just simply talks about what we call triples. It talks about we have something that we're making statements about, we have a property of that something, and then we have a value of that property. And pretty much anything that you deal with in the software world can be broken down into those fundamental triples, whether it's databases, whether it's an object in an object programming language, the object has a property with a value. Even HTML, people put meta values in the head of their document. They're putting in a name-value pair. That looks like 2/3 of a triple, but actually it's a triple because it's talking about the document itself. So it's a fairly simple concept that pretty much anybody could grasp, particularly if they're involved in software and programming in any way. And the other kind of key component of RDF, there's the triple, and then there's the URI, the idea of a unique identifier, the idea that we can give a name to things and know when we're talking about the same thing. And the unique identifier might apply to a person or a holiday or a city, but it also might apply to a concept, and it also might apply to a property. So we can name properties and know when we're talking about the same property of something. So that's pretty basic stuff. RDF has the triple, and it has the unique identifier, and everything else is kind of layered on top of that. But the real advantage is that if we can get information to be in this triple form, then we suddenly enter a world where we can share information all around. And we can say things about the information. We can know when two blocks of data are talking about the same thing. We can combine statements that people make, and all sorts of information can start to be shared. So I would say that's why we need RDF. I think RDF as a concept rather than as a particular markup language, it seems to me pretty obvious that that's what we need. But RDF is very difficult to publish. Generally, at the moment, you have to have an enormous database, enormous triple stores. Generally, people are using RDF XML or maybe some other languages like N3. Generally, it involves a kind of pairing of your presence on the web with your metadata, with your semantic information. So invariably, HTML and XHTML are kind of how you publish your textual documents, and then you have to kind of have some parallel process using RDF XML or some other language to publish your semantic information. And so it's actually quite difficult. It's quite a maintenance overhead. Microformats is one way that people have tried to address that, where you actually start to sprinkle metadata within your page and come up with simple formats that you can encourage people to add to their page. RDFA continues in that tradition and takes it further. RDFA says, well, let's put the metadata into the web page, and because by doing that, it means that we then hook into all of the ways of publishing HTML and XHTML that already exist. So suddenly a blogger is able to produce semantic information, or suddenly somebody building a site with Drupal or something like that is able to produce semantic information, because it's now much more straightforward, because the publishing process, which is now very easy, publishing HTML has been easy for years, is now the same process that's used to publish metadata. So that's kind of the goal, of put RDFA into the page, but not in the way that Microformats does. Put RDFA into the page in a way that uses any possible RDF format, rather than having to come up with little mini kind of subsets of particular vocabularies, as they're often called, collections of terms. RDFA says, well, we're concerned with the structure of putting the metadata in, not the actual language itself. If you're a chemist, you choose which vocabulary you'll use. If you're an engineer, you'll choose which vocabulary. Whatever, if you're you work in medicine, you'll use vocabularies that already exist in your sphere. All we're concerned about is helping you put them in, rather than inventing a new language that can do that. So a kind of quick intro to what RDFA looks like. These are slides from one of those 2020 talks I did at XTech the other week, but I thought I may as well use them here. So you're familiar with ordinary HTML. The means of putting metadata into HTML documents is limited to the meta and the link element. Here we can see I've got meta, name equals author, content equals Mark Birbeck. I've got link rel equals license, and then a pointer to a Creative Commons license. And I'm basically making statements about the document itself. This HTML document, I'm saying who wrote it and what the license is for the document. And that's basically it with HTML. That's about as much as you can do. You can talk about the current document. You can make statements about the current document, but that's about it. So for example, you can't say anything about an image that's in a page. Here we have an image within the page. We have the src attribute on the image tag giving us the URL of the image. But if we try and add rel equals license, href equals, and then point to the Creative Commons license, there's nothing we can say there because that will apply to the document. I'm sure you're familiar with that, but you can put the rel attribute on the anchor, on the A anchor in HTML. And that indicates a relationship between the current document and some external resource. So we're limited here. We can't say anything about this image. We've done a Flickr search. We've got 20. You're allowed to say Flickr in here? But anyway, you know, it's produced by another company. But you do a search. All these images come up, but you're unable to put the licensing information about each of the images within the page. So the first thing that RDFA does is it adds a new attribute. And it says, well, let's have a new attribute called about. We put in the URL of the thing we're talking about, in this case, an image. And now we're able to make statements about that resource. So we're now talking about the image, and we're now saying the Creative Commons license applies to the image rather than to the page. So very simple addition, one new attribute, but it suddenly opens up a whole load of other possibilities within your document in terms of the metadata that you're able to put in there. So just going to whiz through some of the other attributes that RDFA adds. It adds about 5 or 6. Here we can see the property attribute. And here what we're doing is we're mixing the text within the page that the author has added. The author has said a picture of Boston Harbor taken by Paul. And then we've said, well, let's use that information, Paul, and make it the property, make it the creator property. We've still got our about attribute at the top, so we're still talking about the image. And now we've said within the page who took the picture. So we're kind of mixing the dry, don't repeat yourself kind of approach. We're mixing the actual text of the document, and we're using it to be its own metadata here. Quite a powerful technique. Probably seems obvious. You're probably thinking, well, you know, how else would you do it? But don't forget, for the last kind of 10 years, we've had RDFA XML as one set of documents, and XHTML and HTML as another set of documents. So the idea of kind of putting the two together is actually quite novel. Another attribute that RDFA adds is the content attribute, where we can further clarify that information. So in the prose, it might be we just put the word Paul, but actually in the detail, the metadata we really want is Paul Kelleher, who took this picture. And so we're being more precise there about the information. That kind of thing gets more important when you start to deal with things like dates. So in line in the text, we've got a picture taken on December the 1st. That's a date. There's no year on that date. The date's in English, which obviously makes it difficult to use that if, for example, a search engine was consuming this information and wanted to find all pictures taken on a certain day. But here, we've put in line in the content attribute, we've put an actual string, which is much more precise. And in fact, RDFA adds another attribute called data type, which makes it even more precise. We can go further, and we can say that this is not just a string of text that's more precise than December the 1st. It's actually of type date. Data type equals XS:\date. And we've actually, again, been much more precise. One of the other things that RDFA does is it allows us to use namespaced vocabularies. So here you can see we're adding not only the creator information to this image, but we've now added a longitude and latitude into the markup. And again, some service coming along and consuming this information could dig that out. We've added a longitude and latitude from somebody else's vocabulary. We haven't had to invent it. Somebody has already created that. And the flexibility of having namespace qualified properties means we can just go along and pick up properties from any vocabulary that we choose, which is the power of RDF as well. You're familiar with the kinds of things, obviously. Sorry to keep putting Yahoo stuff up, but that's just the slides I just happen to have done. You know, I can see you all shaking. And so here, you know, the kind of thing where normally within the system itself, server side, you would kind of put the image in the right place and put the pins on. Well, what we're saying here is if we had that property applied to anything, not just an image, well, there's no reason why we can't overlay anything onto a map, the current event, where somebody lives, because we can pull that information from anything. The key indicator is the geo:\lat long. We don't care what it applies to. It's the power of sharing vocabularies. Here's another example where we're using the friend of a friend vocabulary. So we're saying here, this is a person this time rather than an image. And now we're saying a property of that person is their name. And we've used the friend of a friend vocabulary. We haven't gone and invented it. So you can imagine now how easy it is for people to put this kind of information into their blog without having to rely on some other publishing mechanism to get their information out there. They can just simply say, here's my name, a picture of me, whatever. And in fact, this is what I'll show in the next part of the talk. Really, I want to start to focus on how to use this information in the user interface. But here's just a screenshot. I'll do some demos in a second. And you can see what's happened here is that the text here has been augmented with the name of the person and a type indicator. This is another attribute that RDFA adds. It says the type of this thing in the about is a person. It's not just unknown, it's a person. And then the user agent here, the web browser here, is using that information to add an icon of a certain type, to add a mouse over. It's gone off to another service to pull in Ivan's picture, and then it's augmented and enriched that whole user interface there, based purely on type of equals person, and then the URI. That hook is what I'll come back to in a moment and explore in more detail. It provides a hook onto which you can add a richer user experience. Another example where you'd say type of book with an ISBN number. Notice there that there's no information there about the title of the book or the image. All of that information is retrieved secondarily in order to create the mouse over there with the picture of the book cover and the title of the book. Another attribute that RDFA adds is the resource attribute. Sometimes you want to be able to link two things together in the way that we talked about with rel, but you don't want the thing you're linking to be a clickable link. In HTML, href would obviously be a clickable link. So in this particular case, we're saying that person A knows person B, and we're establishing that connection using the resource attribute. Another example of using the resource attribute is when in friend of a friend, when you're defining that somebody has a particular online account, you make a reference to the URI of the actual service. Now, you wouldn't want really that to be a clickable link to point to Twitter, as in this example, because it's just a key. You're just simply saying this person has an online account with Twitter. We don't want to create an actual clickable link. And then what's happening here is that information is then used to actually go off to Twitter and get the last things that the person said and display them on the page. So again, simply using some basic information, this basic semantic information in the page, we're able to then enrich the user interface. So that's RDFA. A little slight detour there just to explain what RDFA is all about. So as you can see, it's very simple. It's always the same, no matter what vocabulary you're using, whether you're using friend of a friend or geolocations, whether you're a chemist using a particular vocabulary for conveying specialist information for your vertical. It's always the same set of properties. The about property, which says what is it that we're talking about, the about attribute rather, the property and content attributes, which allow you to define properties that are textual, the data type attribute, which modifies the property and content and sets the specific data type, the type of attribute, which allows you to indicate what type something is, whether it's a person or an event, a calendar event, or a location. The resource attribute, exactly the same as href, except it allows you to make a reference that isn't clickable. And then rel and rev, which we already had in HTML, we're just using them in the same way to set relationships. Minor change that it can now also work with the src attribute. So on image, you can say image, the image tag, src equals, point to an image, and then you could say rel equals license. And you could put the license information directly on the image tag all the way through your document. So that's RDFA. So I think this is quite exciting. I think this opens up immense possibilities now for a kind of another stage of things that we can do on the web. And for me, the key things are the ease with which we can now publish metadata. So people are able to publish metadata in exactly the same way that they can publish HTML and XHTML. So all of the tools that they're already familiar with can, obviously, to make it easy, there would need to be enhancements and extensions, WordPress plugins, this kind of thing. But we've now got that possibility because we're putting the metadata into the HTML and XHTML. So that then makes the metadata available to be consumed. Consumed in a couple of different ways. Consumed by, for example, search engines. You know, for example, that Yahoo's SearchMonkey are now they're checking for microformats and RDFA when they consume information. And what they're then doing is storing that information internally alongside the normal information that a search engine would retrieve when consuming a document. And then what I think the area that I'm most interested in is that then playing that information back, which SearchMonkey does to some extent as well. SearchMonkey then, in the search results, the RDFA can then be used to enhance the appearance of the kind of blocks what do you call them, rich layout or something. In your search results, you have the little boxes that appear around a result, which may not be the normal kind of link and text. It might be something else. It might be an image. It might be there might be a map next to it, whatever. So consuming the RDFA and then using the RDFA as it goes back out again. And I think, you know, the possibilities then of making search results or improving search results, particularly for certain sectors. I think the issue here is that obviously I'm aware that, as I said in my at the beginning, I'm aware that you can go a long way by just simply hammering the data and analyzing it in many different ways. But if you take something like, well, maybe I should just go on to a demo and show. If you take something like chemistry, where the terminology used in chemistry, a chemical might go by a number of different names, including as well, I mean, I'm no chemist, I just kind of looked into this very superficially as I was trying to prepare demos and look at the uses of RDFA over the last period. Go by many different names, but also sometimes often by a common name that we would ordinarily use as well, might, in the world of chemistry, describe something actually very precise. So you can imagine for a chemist, using Google to search or Yahoo to search is kind of useless, it's pointless, because you're going to come across tens of thousands of articles before you get to your specialist article about the particular chemical that you're researching or the particular features. So what this simple example does is I don't know if that's visible, but I'll point out the main bits. So at the top, it's just simply loading the RDFA parser. So this is an HTML document, the source of an HTML document. At the top, it just has a script tag to load the RDFA parser. Then it says also load, using this libxh:include, also load a formatter for chemistry. So I'll go into formatters in a moment and show the kind of thing that they do and what they look like. And then all the blogger then does is mark up their particular chemical that they're dealing with a little sprinkling of RDFA. So in this case, we've said, we're talking about something, and we've said Viagra has the following CID identifier. I can't remember what CID stands for. Chemical identifier, maybe. I'm sure it wouldn't be so simple. But anyway, that's the value of this identifier. In it goes into the markup. Here we've got methane has the following identifier, and it's wrapped around here. And there's the marker. Now, obviously, this could have been wrapped around the word methane. And we could have put property equals that, content equals that. And that would have generated the same metadata. Then what the processor does is it consumes that, and then it runs the chemistry formatter. And what the chemistry formatter has done here is a number of different things. First of all, it's created an icon next to anything that it finds on the page from the CID vocabulary. It creates an icon next to it. So you can see there the 528.1023. Right next to it is an icon. It's not my icon. It's from one of these chemistry sites. Not that I could draw a better one, but I'm just saying. That icon is also a tooltip. And within the tooltip is the shape of the molecule, which obviously doesn't mean a great deal to me, but to a chemist may do. What I've done just to illustrate the difference is in the other chemical identifier, I've added a link that goes off to another website and searches for information about that particular chemical, methane, and tells you more about it. And then the other thing that the formatter has done is displayed these two messages on the side. They're kind of, it's a Growl-inspired message display system there. And they're just simply clickable things. So the key thing here is that all the blogger has had to do is put a little bit of RDFA around some markup, and then they've been able to then indicate that this is not just methane in the way that somebody might talk about, I don't know, cows or something like that in a blog. You can imagine a search on the word methane in Google would yield all sorts of things, and unlikely to find this article, which might have a very, very low interest area threshold. But by actually searching perhaps for its actual chemical identifier, which may not ordinarily appear in the page, or some other information which can be gleaned from this metadata, we're able to get more precise terms, more precise understanding of the document. And then by then pushing that information back out into the page, you can see here the blogger has enabled a kind of richer user interface based on the information that's in there. So basically what happens is the RDFA parser parses the document, creates an RDF triple store, and then searches within those triples to find any formatters that might be available. It then runs the formatters against the triple store, which in turn might do more queries on the data. So I'll give another example. So this example, just somebody has loaded a FOF and a calendar formatter, and then they've sprinkled through their document the location of a meeting, a couple of people that are appearing at the meeting. And then when they run that, messages appear, different messages depending on the type of the item. One's an event, these three are people. Different mouse overs appearing depending on the type, again, of the information. Now, what the processor is also able to do, and this is where it starts to differ from something like, the kind of YouTube, eBay, Amazon, everybody does it, where they say, grab this piece of script and embed it in your blog. And eBay will say, grab this piece of script or piece of markup, and this will embed something about the item you've got for sale. Or YouTube will say, grab this piece of markup, embed it, and it will show the video. And of course, that's very specific. It's kind of a one-off thing. You put it in the page, but then if you want to add another video, you've got to go and grab the code again. And it kind of it hides the relationship between the page and the thing that it is you're trying to display. So this example here uses an eBay formatter, which again show you there at the top loads the eBay formatter. And then all the author does in the blog is just adds a little bit of RDFA that says, I have a bike for sale, and indicates the identifier on eBay of the item for sale. And that's it. That's all they do. Now, what then happens, the parser parses, grabs all the triples. To begin with, the triples will just simply be the identifier for eBay and all of the information for the formatter. But the formatter itself contains further information that says, this is how you can go and find more information about this item for sale. So that process then gets run. Those triples are added into the triple store, and then we then run our processes on those triples as well. So if we then run the actual thing itself, we can see about 3 or 4 things have happened here. The first, the simplest, is that a bike for sale has had a CSS class added to it. So you can see there that it's got a gray background with a white border. We've also added a tooltip, which we saw a moment ago. And in the tooltip, we've added the bit of markup that eBay would have told you to add in your blog. Now, you could say, well, so what's the difference? You know, you've gone to all this trouble of building this stack, the RDFA parser, blah, blah, blah. Could have just cut and pasted that object tag. But you can see here that 4 things have happened on the basis of that eBay item ID in our blog. Whereas if I'd have cut and pasted the script from eBay, I would have only got that one thing. I would have just simply directly got that piece of flash which shows the item for sale. So I said there's more things. So we've changed the CSS style. We've created a tooltip. We've put the flash video into the tooltip. And then if I refresh, you'll see that we then also get a message that appears temporarily which says, found eBay item, about to retrieve more information from eBay. And then this message here that says, for sale, vintage 1986 track bike. That information obviously came from eBay. And so what happened there is we picked up the identifier, we queried eBay, and then we put that information into the triple store, just as if the information had been in the page itself. That information is then available to the stack and the messages, the CSS formatting, the tooltips, all of the different things. We could have gone off and got more information. So it didn't occur to me until yesterday, actually, that I could have actually gone off to something like DBpedia, the interface to Wikipedia, and I could have grabbed some information about this particular item in general, you know, the general bike, not that particular bike for sale, but that brand or that model, or, you know, is there something special about it in the year that it was made? So I could have gone off to Wikipedia and gradually bringing in more and more information into the page, all of it keyed off this identifier, this eBay identifier that the blogger or author has put into their page. The other thing here where it differs from a kind of more standard template approach is that if I just add more of these items, they just work. If I now said I have a bike for sale and I also have a car for sale and put the identifier around the car, then again, the way that the process works, the way that the queries work within RDFA, it would just work. I would get all of this just happening more and more. In fact, you can see that with, if I pick this example here, this is an Amazon book example where I'm using IDs to identify books. The formatter there is a book formatter. I go off, and this time I get 2 messages saying about to retrieve information from Amazon, and now I've got the information there about the 2 books, the book covers. If I move my mouse over there, I get the tooltip, and I get the book cover, and all of this information having been retrieved. The class, the CSS class added to the item in the page, all of that kind of happening purely on the basis of adding that identifier, that one identifier. Similar example, Twitter. Slightly more complex because FOF requires you to put a bit more information in to identify a person. But assuming you wanted to use FOF, you'd say, this person holds an account, online account, it's a Twitter account, and that's their account name. And so as long as you put this little block of markup into your page as many times as you like, you'll get I've configured it to retrieve a couple of messages per person. And you'll see that just by referring to those people in the page, it says found Twitter account, found Twitter account, and then goes off and retrieves the information and puts it into the page. So looking a bit more at these formatters then, the kind of structure of them, essentially they're based on something that because obviously when I started work on this, I wanted to try as much as possible to use things that other people had done. So it's based loosely on something that I came across called Fresnel, which is, I think, MIT, where they're basically using RDF to define these kinds of rules. So what I did is I created RDFA documents which contain these Fresnel rules. And so the RDFA parser, when it refers to the link, when it refers to this external formatter, that is itself in RDFA, is an HTML document in RDFA. And I'll show you in a moment the benefits of doing that when I show a mocked up blog, which is using blog pages to provide the formatters. I then added the idea of actions, because Fresnel is all about formatting. So it says change the CSS class of this particular information so that you can highlight the fact that this is a person or this is a book. I added actions which said go off and get more information from a certain place. And then they use an RDF query language called Sparkle, which you may have come across. I wanted to see whether it was possible to define the queries using JavaScript. And that's not very advanced at the moment, but I've got this idea of JSparkle, which is a way of writing queries against your triple store using JavaScript. So a formatter can be in line within the document because it's just the triples. All you're after is the triples. The fact that it's conveyed in HTML and XHTML with RDFA is just a convenience. Those formatters can be at remote locations, or as I'll show, the final thing I'll show is they can also be on your desktop. So individuals could choose their own formatters to display against information that somebody else owns. So I could have a different chemistry formatter to you, I could have a different calendar event format to you, and all this kind of thing. So so as you can see, a formatter is just an XHTML document with RDFA sprinkled through it. The most basic would just simply say, here's a formatter. Here are the rules. Here is the thing I want to apply the format against. And here is the, in this particular case, what I want to do is apply a CSS class. So the formatter is based on Sparkle, but it's a kind of JSON structure of Sparkle. And I say select book, where, and then the pattern is a set of triples. Now, the interesting thing here is that where it says select book, that book property becomes a JavaScript property that's now exposed to me. I get a list of items, each with a property book, and the book will be the ISBN number. Now, I could have book, comma, A, comma, B, comma, C. I could have more. It's effectively dynamically creating JSON objects. And the JSON objects are based on properties that are in the triple store. So it's quite a powerful technique, even within its own right, I think, this. The set user data property there is effectively saying, provide within the query a pointer to the item within the DOM that generated this information. So you could actually format, for example, the name of the book rather than just the entire book, because the triple that generated the RDFA that generated the name, or for example, if you had a query that said, find me everybody, all the people who have a friend, you could set user data on the friend, and you could format the friend differently to all other people. So the idea of set user data is you say, give me the DOM entry that generated this. And then in this particular case, we're going to just style that with that particular CSS class. Now, obviously, we can go further. This command here, the YAL command, will display a message. And in this case, it just says, I'm about to go off to Amazon to get more information. this one here, pipes data, this says, well, now go and get more information about this. And you can see there where it says resource obj.book, that's the value that came from the query above. And so those properties are now being passed into here. So this is being run for each item. Go off and get more information from another resource. In this case, it's a Yahoo Pipes service that's pulling back information from Amazon about the book. This is what to do with the information when it comes back. You can see here, all I'm doing is I'm just going to add it back into the triple store. So my triple store is now growing. It's as if this information was in there from the beginning, and now I can do anything I want with it. And then once that data has been loaded, I have another of these Fresnel formats that begins again. This time my query is bigger. Before I queried and I said, give me all of the occurrences of type book in this page. Now I can query against my triple store and I can say, give me all books that have a title and a picture. Depiction is the faux thing for an image. And now I'm able to query and find a picture and a title because I'd retrieved them in the prior step from Amazon. And then, again, I can display a message, but now the message contains the title and the thumbnail and all of the information that I've just retrieved. So, so that's kind of all of that there happening together. There's the messages saying go off to get more information, and these are now making use of the retrieved information. So I said also that those, kind of what I've done with it now, I've got a... Oh, here we go. OK, now here, what I've done is to show how you can sort of pull these formats. So I'm going to show how you can pull these formats from different places. And what I've set up here is a kind of test blog which contains formatters and also contains uses of those formatters. So here's a blog entry which contains a formatter just like the one that I was just showing. It has the information there about what to do, what query to run, how to process the information. If I then load a kind of typical blog entry here, you can see the eBay, it's going off to find the eBay information. Oh, sorry, I just clicked on the link again. And there you can see the mouse over has been added to my blog entry, and exactly the same as before. So the interesting thing here, though, is that the formatter that is being run, it's the same formatter as the one I showed earlier, but the point is the formatter is in my blog. The identifier that I've used, in fact, if I edit this blog entry, you can see right at the top that I've said, go off and use this libxh::include is the kind of identifier that the RDFA property that says go and get a formatter. Well, in this particular example, I've said, well, go and get one of my own formatters. Go and get the formatter on my own blog. So it's quite an easy way of maintaining these things. And you can imagine that it'd be very easy to share formatters around and put them in locations that people could use on their own sites. So that's another use. And then the final example I'll show is where we run the whole process in a sidebar. Now, if we look at the source here, I'm looking at a page now which doesn't have any information about formatters. So this is the same Amazon page. I've got the RDFA in there that somebody might have put in, like the chemistry blogger might have put chemistry information in. I've got the information about the book that I'm recommending in this blog, but there's no other information in there. You can see that I haven't got the script tag in there that loads my RDFA parser. I haven't got the identifier in there that says go and load the book formatter. I've just purely got RDFA that some generous soul has decided to add to their document to provide this hook for other people to use. So this may have come from some search results in the page, or it may have come from a Drupal system saying, just here's the metadata. It may have come from some blogger just sort of saying, well, I'm going to tag this up because I know it will be useful to people. And then what happens over here is I have a sidebar installed. Excuse the look of it, but sidebar installed, which will now process this information over here. You can see that it's using that user data part of the query. Remember I said, give me the information about where in the DOM you got this information from. So it's using that over this side to actually augment that and put in the mouse over. And then on the left-hand side, you can see that it's added the same messages. It's gone off to Amazon. It's retrieved the information, which is displaying over there. And you can imagine all sorts of other things that you could do with this. So over there, if I was a chemist, I could see particular information about the chemical compounds, the molecules, whatever, that are mentioned over here on the right-hand side. So that's the kind of different levels, really. The possibility of formatters that are out in the wild, the possibility of formatters that are included within your document, the possibility of formatters that are just another blog entry. The entry itself is a formatter because it's only HTML. We want the RDFA. We're not bothered about the actual document. And then the possibility of your own personal formatters that you might have chosen to have a formatter there that says, add this to my wish list. There's nothing about that in this page over here. That's purely a part of the functionality and the formatters that you choose. So that's kind of it, really. That's RDFA. And my particular interest, as I say, the user interfaces that can be built with RDFA. I think RDFA is about to take off, finding more and more people referring to it. I think the fact that verticals, particular interest areas like chemistry, could really get value from it. I think that the fact that search engines could really help them get value from it in a way that is probably difficult to do using traditional kind of search engine techniques, I think is quite exciting. And then I think the most important thing for me on the user interface side is that we're talking about here a hook onto which other things can be added. Very, very different to the sort of cut and paste this into your blog kind of approach, where you're asking people to sort of link to YouTube or whatever by taking this bit of markup and dropping it in. The idea of a semantic hook onto which you can then almost use semantic CSS. It's almost kind of the Fresnel-style formatters that I showed there, using the semantic information to display, to interact, to change the user experience, I think is incredibly powerful and a very good use of RDFA. So, got a little bit of time for questions, I think. If anybody has any, feel free. There's some links there as well on the. So if you're interested in more information about RDFA itself, then rdfa.info is the main site, jumping off point for anything to do with RDFA, implementations, discussions about the status of the documents at the W3C, that kind of thing. The code that I've been showing here is all in Google Code at lib-xh. It's kind of a broader project that I'm doing, which encompasses things like XForms processors, Smile processors, just a general collection of XHTML functionality within Ajax libraries. And then the only reason I've put YAL there is also an open source project. It's the messaging thing that you saw on the side there. Okay. Yeah.
Any feeling for how long it'll be until these kind of things are widely adopted and used by people, and what's going to drive that process? Or
well, I think things like the Yahoo Search Monkey thing will help. So they're effectively saying if you put RDFA into your document, then we can enrich the user experience by playing it back out again. So I think that will help because it will be worthwhile for people to do it. My particular area of interest is the sort of browser extension, that sidebar that I showed. Although I ended on that, I was that's where I'm most excited. So I think if we can produce a set of tools that help people do things more easily on the desktop, then I think people will also start putting the metadata into their documents. So for example, if I'm planning a holiday and this kind of metadata is in the pages that I'm browsing, and I can just drag them and gradually build up my list of locations over here, I think that if those tools are available. Obviously, there's a lot of good sites that do that kind of thing online, in the site itself, but it's ultimately, somebody else has got your data. And if you can start to build these extensions locally, and I mean, so I think that those kinds of tools. I also think there is, I keep using the example of the chemists, but you could pick hundreds of examples of a vertical where their needs are not the general powerful search engine like Google. So, and I think, it's either do they build their own search engine, specifically, trawling certain blogs and all this kind of thing, or could they provide metadata that helps the monolithic search engines to give better results? And I'm hoping that relationship will also help RDFA take off.
To make that work, you have to go market this to the people that can influence the chemistry community and things like that, or do you think it'll go on its own?
I guess I don't know quite how to answer that, because the only reason I don't quite know how to answer it is because chemists themselves have actually come to RDFA. So I don't know which part of your question that is. Is that, did we sell it to them, or did they find it? Because obviously there are people who blog in any industry, in any vertical. There are people who want to make their lives easier in any of these things. So for example, I saw an article recently in Nature magazine where they're saying, right, we want to add more information to our pages to make them more useful for, say, chemists. What should we do? And they threw open the discussion. And straight away, people were in there saying, use RDFA, use RDFA. So, yeah. But that first question obviously needs to be asked. But the fact is, people are asking that first question. So how do we make it more usable for people is kind of an obvious question now. So anybody else? Any other questions?
So in your example where you were recursively running your formatters and adding more and more information to your page, what kind of impact does that have on page loading time? If there is a blog that say has 50 or 60 or 70 items on it, and there is a formatter that goes off and does a one-level search on eBay and Amazon, and then those formatters end up starting to find it. Does the page sort of keep changing for the next 10 minutes? Or?
Well, I've not tried anything to a massive level of depth. But a couple of things on that. First is that the formatters run in, they basically spawn threads insofar as you can do with JavaScript. And part of this libxh project is to create JavaScript features that can be swapped out if you have something installed that is better. So for example, with YAL, you can display messages, as you saw. But if you have a special component installed, you can actually display messages outside of the browser. Similarly, with the libxh, if you have Google Gears installed, which has threading, worker pool thing, then it will make use of that and improve the performance. And obviously, once you get into the sidebar, then you can do anything you like, because you've installed the sidebar, so you may as well install a C++ parser that's much faster. But certainly, I haven't found any problems with the page load. And in fact, there are many, many of these kind of subsets of this where people are building extensions that people can put into their blogs and that, which do this kind of thing. But they do it in a very specific sector. So there are ones where all links will be augmented with a little icon. You move your mouse over the icon, you get a screenshot of the site that the link is referring to. Well, they're doing pretty much the same thing. They're scanning the document, trying to find information, but they're finding very specific that they've invented their own format. So I think these things already exist in some sense in the page load cycle. And what I'm doing here is I'm generalizing that. I'm saying, well, let's find the information, and you can do anything you want now with the markup.
So that's really nice that DevXH can actually use gears and use the versatile thread. If you are using gears and you have gears available, are you also then persisting out the triple store that you build for a page using gears as offline storage, so that the next time I go there, you pick it up from the
yeah. Well, that's my next thing, because what I want to be able to do is persist the data, as you say, but not just when I go back there next time have that data. I want to, if I go to a completely different site, have that data. So for example, if the RDFA tells me that on the page is a map, I don't want to just know that there's a map. I want to go over to my triple store that I've persisted. Sorry. Left is sidebar, you know, in my mental model of this. So I want the sidebar to kind of go off to the triple store, which is in Google Gears, and then say, well, what other location information have I got? So I could add to the map that's over on the right-hand side information that page knows nothing about. So I could be planning a trip, and I could see where, for example, friends of mine live nearby, or who else is going to be in the area, coming from the triple store, even though the page itself had no knowledge of it. Now, the current model is that I can do that, provided I sign up for tripit.com. I sign up this week to tripit.com, somebody else comes along, and then Doppler says, oh, we've added new features, and I go, oh, God, I really would like the Doppler features, but Tripit's got all my data now, and blah, blah, blah. So you can do those kinds of things to some extent, provided that you hand over your information to a particular site, and you then use that site. What I'm trying to do is say, well, a map's a map. Once I've got a map, obviously the website itself will sprinkle that information, will put its own map information on, because that's the reason I went to that page. But once you've got the map, why not add other location information that I've got stored? And so, yes, you're exactly right. The persistence aspect of it is my kind of next phase of this, and I find that really exciting. Yeah. So thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for your time.